So what I am hoping this handout and today's discussion to be is kind of a review of what we've done most of the semester. Kind of fit the entire semester on 4 or 5 pages. I hope you're all very impressed with that. And as we go through, also think about this as a possible exam checklist, or really an exam study checklist, what you want to be comfortable with on the day of the exam. Now, you could also use it as an exam checklist. We'll talk about why that might be useful when we talk about the exam. But let's dive in. So what we started the semester with was classic issue spotting. So you want to analyze your facts and formulate your questions. So issue spotting really and term generation. And we talked a great deal about this, both aspects of that concept, that the idea we talked whether pre-existing condition was relevant to our client's issue. For the assignment fact pattern, I had to remind a few of you once or twice that it's really not a product's liability issue because there's no product yet. So again, that idea of understanding what the legal question is. But also we talked about the actual term generation, because of course you're putting finger to keyboard and choosing words, or maybe you're even going into an old-fashioned index in the books and looking up words, but you have to figure out what words. So we talked about HMO, of course, and what that stands for if you weren't familiar with it. Managed care is another way of expressing that concept that turned out to be used in the legal literature quite a bit. For your assignment, you discovered the term misbrand or misbranding, and you thought about the fact that sometimes it's misbrand and sometimes it's misbranding, and the idea of truncation. Some of you thought a little bit about using drink or tea, and you experimented with the different terms that might be involved in your client's issue. So you need to be flexible, both in terms of thinking about your issue and making sure that you have identified the issue correctly, but also the terms that you've used. So as you can see here in our checklist, the bullet points go over those concepts. So you are constantly refining questions. So maybe you think originally this is a product's liability issue regarding advertising tea. But hopefully you get to the point where you're always, oh, wait a minute, product's liability has to do with harm caused by a product already produced. We don't have a product produced yet, nor do we have harm. And of course, the last bullet point, just classifying your problem, thinking about, is it federal or state? We had a couple of issues that are actually both. Obviously, civil, criminal, are there procedural issues involved? We talked a whole lot about preemption. Now, that was ERISA preemption, but you seem to get the hang that preemption is actually something you want to think about, especially if you do have an issue that involves federal and state laws. Is somehow the federal law going to preempt it? Okay, so once you've at least established that initial idea of what your issues are and what some of the terms you might want to at least try, then you want to get some background. And again, for a couple of you in your assignments, I felt like I had to do a little bit of convincing that you really want to start in secondary sources if you're starting with an issue that you really know nothing about. I totally get it. In the real world, there are going to be time considerations where you can't spend days and days and days investigating resources. It may be you have some information already. Maybe you know the relevant statute, or who's ever asking you to do research gave you the statute section or a case. It may be as time goes, you develop expertise over time. No if about it. You will develop expertise over time, and then the starting and secondary sources may become less necessary. But if you're faced with a problem, I think like our HMO liability, and I think like our advertising for tea were for you initially, and you don't know anything about it, secondary sources are going to be the place to start. Remember research guides. Easy to find online, tend to be free. Frequently, someone's done some of the work for you. That's always a good thing. Another good secondary source to start with can be legal encyclopedias, again, because they're fairly basic, or even dictionaries. ALR, remember we found a great ALR article for our HMO liability. And again, you're still at the beginning stages, and if it's an issue you don't know a great deal about, you may not know the terminology yet. So be flexible. Think about what the other possibilities are. Maybe you want to throw in pre-existing condition. Maybe you want to throw in polyphenol. But if it's very fact-specific, maybe if you've put that in to say, hey, let me see if I get lucky, think about taking out those very specific facts if you're not finding anything. And of course, we've talked lots and lots about our good friend Google. Great place to start. Just don't stop there. Likewise, Wikipedia. We saw there's a great entry for ERISA on Wikipedia. Great place to get started, but not the place, certainly you don't want to cite to it, and not the place, you need to go further. Okay, so once you're started with secondary sources and getting a sense of what the terminology is, what your issues are, then you may want to delve into some more in-depth secondary sources to get more in-depth issue-specific explanations. So we talked about treatises and law reviews, our practice manual and guides, what I started calling encyclopedic practice materials, the proof of facts, the causes of action. They may help you get further into, and as you might remember, that ANJR proof of facts, that would have been great for you to see for our client, because that really went into a lot of depth of what the different possible theories that we might be able to find HMO liability. So again, some of those sources can be extremely useful, but bear in mind they can also be very expensive on Lexis and Westlaw. So especially for secondary sources, before you go and click on it, find out what that contract is. That's just a basic, wherever you wind up working, find out what your contracts are. Okay, so moving to page 2, we've talked about why secondary sources are so useful in helping us find primary authority, terminology, and so forth. So other tips for using secondary sources, in addition to finding out your contract, remember the table of contents. That seems to be a sub-theme of the course. Look at the table of contents. It helps you a whole lot for a whole lot of reasons. One thing we didn't do a whole lot of, when you do get to a treatise or a chapter, if you sort of click on the checkbox next to the chapter in the table of contents, you can then search just within that chapter. Obviously, you have to know that's the chapter you want. But a useful tool. And again, remember, secondary sources, updating. Check the iLink, check the publication info. Even on Lexis and Westlaw and Bloomberg, even though they're online, they could be pretty out of date. And again, that moves to one of our other overall themes of the course, bibliographic awareness, especially with secondary sources. We found a couple dated 2008. Now, that's 10 years old. You think, oh, I can't look at that, that's too old. But if it's a secondary source and you're in the very beginning just getting to know the issue, maybe it'll give you some background, but as long as you know it's 2008, then you know, okay, I'm just getting the background here. This isn't going to tell me what the law is today, but this will give me a sense of the issues and the terminology. And maybe, even if I'm really lucky and it hasn't changed too much, some references to primary authority. So again, as you're going through and starting to get a sense, you want to, at various stages, stop and evaluate your strategy. Are the secondary sources actually shedding light on your client's problem? It's not just that they have your search terms, and this is one of the true pitfalls of online searching, is that knee-jerk reaction, and I'm as guilty as anyone, that knee-jerk reaction, oh look, it's got all my search terms, it's got to be relevant. Not necessarily. You need to read through and do the usual reading comprehension. Is this addressing the actual question about advertising tea and not products liability? Is this addressing HMO liability and not vicarious liability of physicians? Remember, your client doesn't want to hold a physician liable. She wants to hold the HMO liable. So again, you need to think about whether your searchers are answering the question at hand. In addition, are there new questions that are coming up? Remember that proof of facts started to give us some ideas of some other theories in which we could hold hold the HMO liable. We saw a fiduciary duty. We never really investigated it for the purposes of the course. The whole concept of the negligence of the HMO. All of those suggested. So are you getting new questions that you want to keep track of in your research log, and however that works for you? I gave you a couple of examples. Are there other questions that are coming up that you want to make sure you can go back and see, ooh, is this going to help? Because we focused on the preemption side, and it's very possible that our client is preempted under part of federal law, but maybe under Section 1132, she can, or preempted in state court, but maybe under Section 32 in federal court, she could sue. We never quite got that far. Is there a fiduciary duty that might have been violated? Is there negligence of the employee at the HMO that we could claim? How does that all work together? So are these other questions coming up? And again, keep track. So once you get a sense of what the issues are, you do have to eventually check the primary authority, the law. That's why we have those sources of the law. And you need to, and this is not optional. Secondary sources are a really good idea, but they can be optional. Primary authority, not optional. And no parts of primary authority are optional. You may not find all parts. There may not be regulations for your particular issue, especially if it's a common law issue, but you need to check. You obviously need to check if there's statutes and cases as well. Strategies for going about that. Of course, you're looking at secondary sources. One of the great things about secondary sources is they give you references. By all means, follow those up for sure, wherever you found them. But you also want to make sure to do an independent search. What I was hoping some of you would see across doing the different assignments is that typically you found one aspect of the issue in one title of either the USCA or McKinney's. So you might have found Title 21, I think it was, in the USCA, but not Title 15. And there were two sections that were relevant, two very different parts of the code. Likewise, in McKinney's, there was the Agriculture and Markets Code that definitely applied, but there's also the General Business Code that addressed more of the false advertising aspect of the issue. So doing an independent search, in addition to following up whatever you find the secondary sources, will help ensure, when that's the case, that you'll get both aspects, or if there are more than two aspects. And, of course, you need to read the actual statute. Take advantage, if you need it, to the references that are there to legislative history, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Don't forget notes of decisions. Again, they won't always be useful. The great thing about notes of decisions is that they've got those topic headings, so you can see quickly what cases might be useful and which cases you don't want to look at. For a section like 1132 or 1144 in the USCA, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of cases. You don't want to have to read through every one, even listed on a screen on Lexis or Westlaw. The topic headings on notes of decisions will help you a lot. And again, for a complex issue like our HMO liability question, once we realize, oh my goodness, I have to worry about preemption, in 1144 you'll get references to other secondary sources to help you flesh out what this whole preemption thing is and how I need to deal with it. And again, I'm going to say this hopefully a whole lot more times today. Make sure you check the context of your section. A few of you made this mistake in several different instances looking at statutes. For instance, in McKinney's Agriculture and Markets Law, you found false advertising, except that section related to meat. Obviously, meat isn't relevant for your client. You need to look up that hierarchy in the context in the very top part where it gives you all the heading information. You see McKinney's, and then you see agricultural markets, and then you see the breakdown. Make sure all of that is relevant to your client. Also, the table of contents is going to help you find other relevant, if there are other relevant statute sections within that context. They won't always be, but it's a good way to check. Again, remember also, it doesn't even say here, but check for definitions. If you see a definition section, always good to take a look. If needed, which will be the minority of the time, I would think a small minority of the time to have to search legislative history, again, to see if you need a reason to or if you need an argument to define the terms used in the statute, or like Caitlin ran into, you want to make a policy argument as to why it should be interpreted one way as opposed to another, then of course you'll want to do legislative history research. Again, I think that will be a small percentage of the time, but obviously, as we now know, thanks to Caitlin, it's not never. So remember, committee reports are going to be the best source for intent. Policy arguments, any of the documents might be useful. Remember our all-important public law number, or our all-important chapter law number if you're in New York, and use those historical and statutory notes. On Westlaw they're called editors and revisers notes, to figure out which public law number you'll need, or chapter law number. So you'll start with the first public law number because that's the one that enacted your section, so that's likely to be useful, but it may be parts of your section were amended, or maybe your section was or your subsection was added later. So that's what those historical and statutory notes will be very useful for. Again, state legislative history is going to be even less straightforward. At least Westlaw gives us links to the bill jackets for New York. So that's the first place I would go, other than that New York Digital Library collection, which also has bill jackets. Actually, I'd go to the digital library first just because it's free. If you've got another state to think about with regard to legislative history, go to their website, or honestly call the state library. And of course, as you should not be surprised at this point to hear, you got to remember, again, update, update, and update. Not difficult. It's not like it's really, really important. Doesn't mean it has to take you really, really long time or a really, really lot of effort. Just make sure Lexis and Westlaw don't have red flags. Take a look and see when was the U.S. code last updated on Lexis? When was McKinney's last updated? Now, make sure you understand the difference between when the section itself was amended and the difference between that and when Lexis or Westlaw updated everything. Make sure you understand how that we went over that in detail. If you're still confused, don't hesitate to ask, but understand that difference. Again, updating, and updating statutes is really, really easy on Lexis and Westlaw, but it's still absolutely necessary. Already talked about using table of contents in codes. Any questions? Secondary sources, that kind of zoomed right into primary and statutes. Okay, so Part B, case research. A lot of you've been spending 2 or 3 years reading cases in law school, so your assumption is they're the important stuff. I would say, unless you already have a case or you're already very familiar with your area of law and know that it's common law oriented, I wouldn't start in case research. That's where all law students and new attorneys want to start. Get references from those secondary sources. Get references from Notes of Decisions or Google Scholar. Some of you in the case assignment went to FindLaw or Legal Information Institute as your website. That was fine. I personally think Google Scholar is a little bit better, so just don't forget it exists, but whatever works for you. So try for free source online, references from secondary sources, annotated code, Notes of Decisions. And if you get a good case, use its features. That's why we pay tens of thousands of dollars for Lexis and Westlaw, because they provide these extra features for us. So Westlaw provides the topic and key number system. Lexis provides the head notes. So if you find a good case that's on point, take a look at what those head notes or topics and key numbers are. Even Bloomberg got points of law. It was kind of cool. If you find yourself in a world with Bloomberg, that might be useful also. Make sure you can use also Shepard's and Keysight. Some of you like to Shepardize this head note in Lexis. You can also just click on other cases that cite to this head note in Westlaw. Whichever works for you, take advantage of those tools once you find that good case. But just like we talked about with statutes, you need to do a separate keyword search, because when you use those topics, they're great. They'll help you find other cases on that topic, but you're narrowing yourself to that topic. There may be other areas, other issues that are relevant to your client. So you want to do a separate keyword search. A couple of different tools. Another theme for the course, our toolbox. So a couple different keyword search tools. There's just the regular keyword search, easy enough. We all know that. I showed you the Synopsis and Digest Advanced Search on Westlaw, a more targeted search. A lot of you in your assignments were really perceptive in recognizing that that's really going to be useful when you really want a targeted search. And you're absolutely right, I agree entirely. But a useful tool in those circumstances. Like any tool, sometimes it's really good, and sometimes it's not so good. It's not that you just never use it because it didn't work one time. You keep it in your toolbox ready to use when you think it might help. And I mean, I'm emphasizing supplementing finding one good case with keyword searching. The opposite applies. If you start with keyword searching, which depending on how you come to your issue, that may be what you do first, looking for cases, try to supplement that with some of the topic searching, because your keywords will be all over the place. Take a look and maybe use that the key number filter that we talked about once you have a list of results for cases on Westlaw. The theme here is use multiple approaches. And once again, of course, update. You all know this, but most best about cases. Shepard's key site are amazing. Again, it doesn't have to be difficult, but it is absolutely critical. And a lot of you, I was pleased, understood the webcast and the Lexis module that you looked at, and understood that you can't just react to the yellow, the color of the flag or the color of the signal. You actually need to take a look and say, okay, it's got a yellow flag, why? Is it my issue or is it some other issue? And it's even true if it's got a red flag. Is it my issue? Is it some other issue? So don't stop looking at a case just because you see a red flag. Yeah?
As well as a court has like a right to, even be a part of the discussion.
Absolutely. Also, does that court have authority? We talked quite a little bit extensively about whether a court has authority. If that judge can be appealed, can be overruled by that higher court, then he has authority, was the guideline I gave you. But absolutely right. Thank you. Questions about cases? Shepardizing, maybe looking at updated. Okay. Regulations and administrative materials. Please don't forget these. When we talk about the exam, I'll say this a good 2 or 3 more times, because that is the one area where at least a few students forget it. And I just can't give you credit if you don't put anything on the page. And more importantly, when you get out there and practicing in real life in a few months, don't forget regulations then either. As you may or may not have seen as you are getting to assignment 5, you will actually see for our client's issue, there are a couple of CFR regulations that are pretty on point. And if you were to miss them for your client, you would be missing a critical aspect of the law. Frequently, because regulations are so detailed, that's where the meat of the issue is. So again, the tools for finding regulations, hopefully this is getting a little bit repetitive. I won't belabor the point too much. References found in secondary sources or the annotated code. Can't rely on those, though. A lot of times the references in the annotated code are to regulations that have nothing to do with your issue, but hey, if it's relevant, you take it. We talked and looked at a couple of topical databases, CCH, specialized databases, practice guides, again, what I like to call the encyclopedic practice guide, the proof of facts, causes of action, very practice-oriented. If there are important regulations, they're likely to reference them for you. And if possible, even more important, to check the table of contents because they are so specialized. Doing keyword searching is going to be all the more challenging. They're so specialized, so they pick very specific words. So if you don't know that exact word in advance, and how could you because you're just learning the issue, then you might not pull that up with your keyword search. But if you check the table of contents and the context, that's where you might find your relevant regulations. And sometimes you have to go pretty far up. Remember, our definition section for ERISA and preemption was in a totally different part of the CFR than the initial section that we found from the reference from the annotated code. But they still were very relevant. So again, if it's still, as you work your way up the hierarchy, just work your way up, is it still relevant? Is this still relevant to my client? Yes. Is it, you work your step up. Is that step up still relevant to my client? Yes. It goes so far that it's just Department of Labor, which of course covers a whole lots of different issues totally irrelevant. That's probably where you can stop. And again, even CFR, update, made totally easy by the eCFR. The only non-totally easy thing about the eCFR is finding it, as we ran into that. But I showed you where the link is from GovInfo. Again, that also was a good reminder lesson to be very careful when you're looking at a website to judge the reliability of that website. Because if you Google eCFR, at least when I did a couple of weeks ago, I was getting that .io. Why some other organization put an eCFR up is beyond me, but you don't want to rely on that. You want to take a look and see, oh, wait a minute, .io. And then start to see ads, as it happened to me, and think, wait a minute. And then think about how you might find it elsewhere by going through a known website like GovInfo and trying to find it that way. And also don't forget administrative decisions and guidance. It says if appropriate only because you may not find them. They're the most difficult to find. Definitely look. And by definitely looking, it's doing what you've already done, either having your keyword search and looking at your results, the different types of resources and your results. Googling, if you can. By this point, if you're looking at regulations, you should have identified one or more agencies, state or federal, that are relevant to your issue. So Department of Labor for our ERISA question, Department of Agriculture or FDA for our T question, and then take a look at those websites and see if you can find decisions or guidance. And be in the special look at throughout the process for guidance, because a lot of times if that agency, if the FDA is issuing guidance on advertising for tea, you want to know about it. Or even just advertising for beverages, you want to know about it. And the sooner you know about it, the easier and sooner you will be able to complete the rest of your research. Questions on regulations, administrative materials, guidance, agencies. Okay. Mentioned these earlier. Again, depending on what it is you need to do for any particular client, don't forget that these other types of resources exist. Again, you're most familiar with Lexis and Westlaw, so that's where you're going to go first, and that makes sense. But sometimes some of these other sources can be even more useful. So, of course, if you're drafting documents, there are form resources out there on Lexis and Westlaw, as well as in other sources. If you're litigating, of course, don't forget court rules. I showed you in Proof of Facts some practice checklists, some very practical-oriented help for doing practical things for a client. And they're in these, some of which are in Lexis and Westlaw, some of which are in these topical databases that I showed you briefly. CCH covers a whole bunch of different topics. RIA is just tax. There are a whole lot of databases for securities. If you find yourself practicing in the securities area, you may wind up using those. That goes back to our check what your contract is for Lexis and Westlaw. Also see what other resources you have available in your organization. The advantage of these topical databases is that they tend to be flat rate. So you don't have to worry about what's my contract and what's this cost and secondary and primary. You go into CCH. If your organization subscribes to CCH, you don't have to worry about what you look at or what document you open or how much time you're spending. It's a flat fee. And also we looked at cause of action and proof of facts. They kind of fit into treatises, and so that's how I present them. They can be really useful for at least our HMO liability question that HMO, the HMO liability and proof of facts was super, super useful. Lots of students haven't seen those before, and that's one of those types of resources. If you find something on point like that, it's fantastic, but don't always expect to find something right on point. Check it out. If it's not there, don't spend a whole lot of time. So I've kind of come full circle around back to secondary sources, proof of facts, cause of action. Unfortunately, and we started out way back in the first class talking about this, unfortunately, research isn't a nice, easy step-by-step process. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're done. If it were, we probably wouldn't have advanced legal research classes. It's more of a spiral. So you start out, and maybe you start out in Google, and maybe you get to a couple of good sites and you learn about preemption, and then you go and you find the section on preemption, you learn a little bit about that, and maybe follow up back to secondary sources to do a little bit of that. You check out some cases, you get referred to regulation. As you look at proof of facts or cause of action, you realize, oh wait, there are these other theories, so maybe there's fiduciary duty theory, and maybe there's HMO employee negligence theory, so you go back to secondary sources to check those theories out, and you come back and you figure, oh, maybe I can, looks like maybe I'm not going to make it in state court, but maybe I can sue under section 1132 in the USCA. So now I got to learn about 1132 and how that suit might work out, and still there's other fiduciary duty and employee negligence theories I still have to check out. So you're going kind of around in a circle, but I think of it as a spiral because you are honing in on ultimately the end of your research where you're ready to sit down and draw a conclusion, write a memo, whatever it is you need to do to advise your client. So some tips in terms of how to negotiate that spiral. Again, it's never bad to go back to secondary sources to get back on further questions. Remember, Shepard's and Key sites, in addition to updating, can help you find other resources because they're going to tell you other cases, secondary sources that cite to any particular resource, statute, regulation, case that you found. And I haven't talked too much about current awareness sources since the beginning of the semester. Again, they're probably going to be better toward the end of the process because you'll know a little bit more and you'll have a better sense of what to focus on, but they can be very useful. And if you bump into one that's really helpful in the beginning of the process, there's nothing wrong with that either. But good to be aware, not only aware of the current awareness sources, but good to take a look at them because over the course of your research, or there may be changes in the law, or not even just the course of your research. There may just have been recent changes 6 months ago, a year ago, that haven't made it into the case law yet. You would see the changes in the statute, but by looking at the current awareness sources, they'll give you a sense of how that's getting worked out in the legal world, in the practice of whatever area you're in. Good to keep up to date. Just scan the New York Law Journal or equivalent for your state. If you wind up specializing in an area like family law or securities law, BNA has these email alerts, and you can just sort of scan through and see what's new, what are new cases out there, what are states doing, just to keep aware in the area. And of course, as you know I had to have a separate section on updating, and updating. But before we go any further in that, any questions about sort of the overall process of narrowing in? So I've really already covered this with regard to updating, but just to emphasize it's important. And then the question we always get, which is an excellent question, when am I done already? You know, eventually I do have to write the memo or the brief or advise my client on how she can advertise her tea. And the best answer that I've heard, seen, know about is, again, a couple of aspects. You will never find everything that's out there, at least not for a complex issue. So accept that fact, because otherwise you will spend forever researching. So how do you tell when enough is enough? First, again, that concept of your question has been answered. You have a sense of how your client can go ahead and advertise her tea. You now know what are the theories that we can try to, if any, that we can try to hold this HMO liable for your client. And you start, the second part is you start to see the same resources, the same cases, the same statutes referenced over and over. And even though we didn't delve into the details, because we didn't actually read the cases or the secondary sources, we started to see some repeats. That ALR article, the Proof of Facts article, the Aetna v. Davila case, of course, sections 1144 and 1132, the New York sections. So as you start to see them over and over, and you feel like you've answered your question, not just found documents with your search terms, that's pretty much when you can say, okay, I found what's important to find. I now need to sit down and structure my brief, memo, plan of action for advertising, whatever it is that you need to do. Questions? Okay, couple of general tips. Already mentioned, okay, start with Google, just don't stop there. Talked about finding contract already. Get to know, I mentioned get to know your contract, get to know other, whatever other databases you have available, maybe Hein Online, we use that a lot, that's another flat rate database. Get a little bit comfortable to know some of the free web sources that are out there, of course Google, Google Scholar for cases, or FindLaw or Legal Information Institute, GovInfo, if you do a lot of statutory work, or federal statutory work, the New York website, if a lot of state statutory work. And some tips I like to call librarian tips. Be curious about what you don't know. Sometimes that's the key to really finding a creative theory of how to help your client. Sometimes wait a minute, no one's answered this question, could be because no one's brought it up, and then that's a way an argument you can make. It's also a way to learn. I do it too, sometimes you look at something and you're really busy, you've got an under deadline, I have no idea what it is, but I just can't focus on it now. You've got to find a way to either get back to it or at least address it, because if you don't focus on it, that's what's going to come back. And your supervisor is going to say, well, did you answer the question of ABC? And you think, I thought about that, but I couldn't quite get myself to do it because I didn't know about it. Again, we talked about adaptability in term choices, in resource choices. Some of you like Lexis, some of you like Westlaw. It may be you wind up somewhere you've got to use the other, and obviously you have to be flexible, or maybe that you've come to the conclusion, I really like Westlaw, but Shepard's just works better for me. Or be adaptable and try a new resource. And speaking of new resources, if you can make the time, take advantage of training. Some of your organizations will have training that the Lexis Westlaw folks come in to show whatever. I'm going to show you a couple of new resources in a little bit. If you have the opportunity for someone to teach you how to use them and you can make the time, that can be very worthwhile. Already mentioned, get to know your employer's resources, not only the research resources for your employer, but the people resources. I still think people are smarter than computers, so they can help you. So the tech folks, make friends with the tech folks. If you have a supervisor that you work with regularly, see if you can get to know his or her favorite treatises and resources. She or he's been doing this for a while, and so they just automatically go there, and they may just assume you know about it. So find a way to work it in conversation. And, what's your favorite? And they will be very pleased to tell you, because everybody likes to talk about themselves. But also, when you come back and you say, hey, I checked the Federal Securities Law Reporter, because that's what they love about securities, they're going to have more confidence in your judgment and your research skills. Translate skills. Scalability is the term of art these days. So if it works in one area, try it in another. An example of that, I keep on saying table of contents, right? Works in secondary sources, works for statutes, works for regulations. If you find that kind of tool, say, oh, well, this works somewhere else. Or you see it somewhere else and you know it works in one place, think, oh, well, it worked really well in this one aspect, maybe it'll work in another. And then finally, related to the get to know the people resources, it really helps to say good morning and be really nice to all the folks that work there, the custodians and the secretary, the administrative assistants and the humble librarians. And obviously I have a self-interest in that, but people are people. And I can tell you from experience in law firms where, I would just say hi and then there'd be some god-awful emergency and a partner needed this, that, or the other thing, and I could go down to the copy center and because they said hi to them every morning, I could say, oh, could you really put me ahead and do this real quick? And, because they thought I was nice, they went ahead and did it. And I can tell you on the other end, as a librarian, and I deal with attorneys, I deal with some really wonderful people, practicing attorneys, and I deal, humans are humans, I deal with people who aren't quite as nice. And when people are rude to me, my instinct as a human is, I'm still going to do my job, so they ask me a question, I'm going to answer their question. But I won't go any further than that. Does that make me a good librarian? Probably not, but that does make me human. And there are lots of other humans like me. So just keep that in mind that, what did they say, honey attracts more flies than vinegar or something like that? Any questions? So that's our overall strategy. As I said, I think this is a good sort of, if you understand what's in this document, you will be a great deal of the way toward having a good sense of being ready for the exam. Going to jump shift, as they say now, and talk a little bit about some of these newer resources. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll talk about the exam. So amongst the newer research resources out there, there's one called Ravel. And Ravel is trying to use some of these data analytics. It's also a legal research platform. You'll notice that they are now owned by Lexis. So you will start to see some of these data analytics aspects filter into Lexis. Some of it's actually happening in Shepherd's now. But you can also sign up. Part of Ravel's mission before they got bought out by Lexis was to provide free access, at least to case law, so you can actually sign up for them for free. And just to give you a sense of what that might look like, I signed up and did our favorite search, liability HMO, and here are the cases. So you see this data visual representation. And, again, the circles are the cases, and the bigger the circle, the more they're cited. The legends here to figure out what all the lines and dots mean. You can see our Aetna cases here. So that is a new way of approaching legal research. And if that visual representation helps you, then that's something that is actually available. The other sort of big thing that gets all the buzz these days, of course, is AI, artificial intelligence. And that's, of course, where all this big data, and you've been hearing the controversy over how Facebook is dealing with all our data, and they're monetizing it and making lots of money because it's big data, and they're collecting it and analyzing it and selling it to whatever entities that will buy it. So a lot of that is filtered into legal research, believe it or not. And in fact, you've already seen some of it. Oh, I forgot one. Well, all right, let's take a look at that. So what you have seen here on Lexis, when you start to type in, this is the artificial intelligence aspect, not the big data aspect. I'll show you that too. But the artificial intelligence aspect here on Lexis, you start to type in, and they have 5 or 6 standard questions that you might ask, that what Lexis will do is actually provide you an answer rather than just provide you a list of results. So statute of limitations are one of the standard questions. I've already limited to New York, as you might see over here. So I've started to type in statute of limitation, breach of contract. Oh, it went away. That's a bummer. So you see it's popping up. Do this. There we go. Breach of contract. Oh, and it disappeared my New York. Okay. And this is the AI, artificial intelligence aspect. I'm not entirely sure why it's pulling up ERISA, which actually is an interesting object lesson, because it may be artificial intelligence, but I don't know how intelligent it is, because the standard breach of contract, if we were to go to at least back to New York, it may or may not pull up the correct section. So you still have to do the work of making sure it is correct, which my mind limits the usefulness, but yes, it's loading. So I bring this up and I went back to type it in again because I've used statute of limitations in New York as examples, so I actually happen to know the relevant section number, and that's not it. So you have to be you have to be pretty wary. Westlaw does the same thing, trying to incorporate artificial intelligence. Oh, where's my Westlaw? Oh, it signed me out. With the same kind of approach of those standard types of questions, like statute of limitation. So you can see what is basically it's the Westlaw answers. Another sort of artificial intelligence that's got big buzz at the Legal Tech Show in New York a couple of months ago is Kara, put out by Casetext, another smaller legal research firm, and they're trying to differentiate themselves by really moving forward as fast as they can with the artificial intelligence. So what they let you do is to upload a file, so a brief, a memo, and then what they will do is they will return a list of suggested cases. So they will sort of be doing research for you. And it's actually something, as I said, that got a lot of buzz at the Legal Tech Show, or I was told. I fortunately wasn't there. But this is kind of where AI, hot new thing, is moving within the legal research world. The big data I referenced with regard to Lexis, this litigation profile suite, so how you can use Lexis to analyze data out there to help generate more business or learn more about what a judge, a law firm is doing. So this litigation profile suite is in this little grid up here on the left. We've used this before for some other aspects of Lexis, public records, the verdict settlement analyzer, and so here's the litigation profile suite. And you can find out data about different attorneys, judges, expert witnesses. So just so you can see quickly what that would look like, I'm going to choose Judge Alito because he's the only one with that name. And so you can see a data analysis of his opinions. A lot of larger law firms are using these data analytic tools to essentially generate business, find out what firms and what clients are doing, and then pulling in all the data that can be collected and having these tools analyze it. So we saw that litigation profile suite on Lexis. On Westlaw, it's called Monitor Suite. And it's requiring me to log in again. So I had done a search on Facebook. And so it's just analyzing the different areas where Facebook has been involved in litigation. And of course, these days it's a lot. It's a decent amount of criminal justice. Who knew? Yeah, actually not. Well, yeah, a decent amount of criminal justice. But again, you get the sense of all the different litigation involving Facebook. And I'm showing you just a very simplistic application of these data analytics. And Bloomberg also has its version, litigation analytics. Another tool out there, these aren't necessarily new, but they're good to know about, and this goes a little bit more to when you need to do non-legal research and get some information, not necessarily big data, but information in a particular area. We all go to Google, and we're, at least for the foreseeable future, that's going to be our first stop in terms of searching the web, but a lot of people don't know that they're actually topical specialized search engines that can be really useful if you've got a very specialized area. I tend to use them, for instance, for medical. So legal, you can see, not surprisingly, ones we already know about, but you may, if you've done any medical research, WebMD may be one you know about, and there are all these other areas. And these are all different search engines. There's even one called a computational search engine, which will basically give you statistics on whatever you type in. And again, this is called Wolfram Alpha. I'm saying that correctly. So I just typed in lawyers, and so you can get statistical information about people employed as lawyers or in the law. Going to shift gears a little bit away from one area of buzz, artificial intelligence, to a very recent area of buzz, and that's privacy. I don't know if you've all been following what's going on with Facebook, and I don't know if you think much about privacy, your privacy in terms of what goes on the web, but if you do, a couple of things you might want to know about. One is DuckDuckGo is actually a different search engine. So it's an alternative to Google, but it will not track your search results. So I actually tend to use that when I do have medical research, because I don't want Google knowing what I'm searching regarding medical research. And that's just my thing. Everybody has their own area of what they want to keep private. So if you have a particular area like that, DuckDuckGo is good to know about. Or if you have something you're worried about a client keeping that private, DuckDuckGo is good to know about. Speaking of our good friend Google, now we've heard a lot about Facebook and Facebook privacy, and I don't know if you've read or heard the stories about how you can go online and download everything Facebook knows about you and go through and maybe delete some of it or maybe not, depending on what you're interested in. And one of the ongoing commentary I've heard is, yeah, that's Facebook, but actually for a lot of people, what the information Google has on us is actually far more voluminous and significant. So again, if you are interested, it's worthwhile to read Google's privacy policy. And again, easy enough to find by Googling Google privacy policy. So I am currently signed in to Chrome, Google's browser, of course, and I know I'm signed into Chrome because I can see my little picture there. And so a lot of different things I can see because I do sign into Chrome, and you can either think it's a great thing because it's convenient and it tracks it, or you can think it's a really creepy thing. Anything I search on this computer in Chrome, Chrome remembers. So you can see it's I just visited search engines and visited Bloomberg Litigation Analytics and visited Bloomberg Law School Home and visited BNA. So just what we were doing, Chrome has a record of, and it has going back, I actually don't know how far, but far back. Again, nothing wrong with it as long as you make the affirmative decision, this is okay. Other aspects of Google to know about. If that troubles you, by the way, Google remembering stuff, and I tend to do this, again, for more personal things that I don't want people remembering, Firefox is developing, in part response to the Facebook controversy, but in part just to differentiate themselves from Chrome and to get more market share, I guess. Firefox is trying to present them as the browser if you are more concerned about privacy. So Firefox just came out with a new extension called Containers. So it allows you to do tabbed browsing and keep your browsing in a container. I actually haven't had a chance to check it out. But if it is something you're interested in, check out Firefox and Containers. But going back to our good friend Google, and moving a little bit away from privacy and just some of the cool stuff Google can do for us, we've talked a little bit, or more than a little bit, about Google Advanced Searching. Now I told you about the site search where wherever you are, you can type in SITE : and your web address. But there are other advanced search techniques as well, and there's, if you Google Advanced Google Search, you will come to this page, which is just a template of some of the advanced features available to us in Google. And sure enough, the site, which we've talked about, is already here, but you can also search by file type. For those of you who are always looking for PDFs, you can actually tell Google, find my search terms, but only pull back PDF file types. Or if you need to do a PowerPoint presentation and want to get ideas of what other folks have done, you can tell Google, just pull back results that are PPT or PPTX, PowerPoint file types. Those, to me, are the most frequent uses. I also will occasionally limit by time. If I know something's happened in the last month, but I don't want to pull up pages, that were last updated 2 years ago, I can use some of the drop downs for time as well. And the other thing I like to show about Google, and this only go here if you have time to kill, because you will wind up killing a lot of time, is the different features Google has. So here's Google Help, and again, you get there by Google Help. So if you want to learn more about Google search, so this is what I do for a living, so like I said, for me it's a real time sink. I can go to the Google Search Help page, which should be, and we'll just go there. So, and I can learn all the different and other advanced ways to utilize Google. And it's always changing. They're always improving, to their credit. And what I can do with Google Search. So that's Google Help, and then specifically Google Search, but you can, as you can see, there are other aspects you can learn more about as well. And then if you are a real Google addict, there are all these other Google products. And basically, there are a number of different ways of getting here, but if you Google Google products, again, real-time sync. If you're curious about tech stuff, you could try these different aspects. The one I will highlight, because it is research-oriented, is Google Alerts. I actually use this a lot, and one of you actually mentioned it, so I'm guessing you know about this as well, but I don't know if everybody does. So we've seen on Lexis and Westlaw those little bells you can set up and tell Lexis or Westlaw, hey, I want you to run this search and send me the results every month, every week, every day. Way to keep up on whatever issues you're following, way to keep up. You can run a key site alert or a shepherd's alert if there's a case you're following and you want to see, does it get appealed, or once it's been appealed, what's going to happen to it. Well, Google Alerts lets you do the same thing across the free web. So you can run a term search, set up a Google Alert, and then get results periodically to see what's new and what that would look like. So I have a Google Alert following the issue of animal abuse registries. So every week I get an email about different states that, or whatever the results are for my search terms. And that can be a really, really useful way to follow whatever issue, legal or otherwise, that interests you. Okay, a couple of other non-Google tools that I think are worth knowing about. Anybody hear of the Wayback Machine? Now, do you know the cartoon Wayback Machine, or do you know the internet Wayback Machine? Okay, well, the cartoon is much more fun, but the internet is more relevant for our purposes. So you can Google Rocky and Bullwinkle and Wayback Machine if you really want to know the cartoon. With regard to the internet version of it, you can Google Wayback Machine or just Google the Internet Archive. And for those of you who might not know what the internet version is, it's a way of seeing a web page back in time. So sometimes if you get to one of those error 404 and the web page is no longer available, but you really wanted to see the information, maybe there was a document that was there and someone didn't bother to update the link, and so you get that error 404. You can take that link, plug it into the Wayback Machine, and maybe get to that document when it existed at that link back in time. I have used this to find documents for lots of people lots of times, and it's really quite nice. So here's an example if you wanted to see what our humble web page looked like back even as early as 2003. You put in the web address in the Wayback Machine, choose whatever time period you're interested in, and that's what the Hofstra Law School website looked like back in 2003. Not very exciting, I realize, but hopefully you get the idea of how this can be extremely useful. And all you need to remember is either Internet Archive or Wayback Machine. So if you're a cartoon fan, Wayback Machine. If you're not a cartoon fan, Internet Archive works as well. Okay, Stan, at long last. LastPass. Stan and I have had conversations about remembering passwords. I could not survive without this. This is an extension for your browser, Firefox, Safari. I know it works for Firefox, Safari, and of course Chrome. Don't know about other browsers if you use other browsers. It is not device specific, so you can use it on your phone, your iPad, your Android, iPhone or Android. I can't promise you every single phone. What it does is it keeps track of all your web passwords. So if you're like me and of course you've got Lexis and Westlaw, I know you have Bloomberg, you may have banks if you're comfortable with that, Amazon, other websites that every website these days seem to, Facebook of course, require logins. And of course you always hear, people getting hacked don't always use the same password as one of the standard advices to avoid your data getting stolen. So a password manager is one way to help you remember all of that. And as I said, I could not exist without it at this point. So you can. LastPass is one, Dashlane is another. There are a bunch of others. Again, if you just Google Password Manager, you'll find a whole list. I just happen to like and get used to LastPass, not that I'm advertising for them. The other good thing is for most uses it's free. If you want to start to get fancy and get teams and share with your family, then you have to pay a little bit of money. It's actually not that much. But so I don't know if you've ever noticed, you'll see in my browser the little LastPass extension. When I go to, let's go to Hunt. Actually, that's not the way to do it.
Retroactively figure them out? Like, what if I've already forgotten about 65 passwords?
Well, what it will do is you'll need to, once you've installed it in the, once you've installed it, you'll need to go. And the nice thing of what it will do is it will actually, when you're filling it in for the first time, you'll have to do the forgot password. But then if you put it in, it will ask you, do you want LastPass to remember this? And all you have to do is say yes, and it remembers it, and you're done. So I make sure I'm logged into LastPass anytime I go to a new site that requires me to create a login. So let's see if this will work. So you see this these dots, this is LastPass's logo. And if it remembers that website, it remembers the website, it will give you choices. So these are different websites that it remembers. And I could choose one of these, and it will remember and fill it in. So, and fairly, I think, easy to use, straightforward. You get what's called a vault. So this is my professional LastPass, so these are all the different sites, and it remembers, and when I go to those websites, it will just fill it in. So as we've gone through class, and I keep on getting logged out of Lexis and logged out of Westlaw, I haven't had to type everything in, LastPass will fill it in. Okay, last but not least in useful tools, how many of you use Dropbox? Anybody use Google Drive? Cloud storage. Now, obviously, there are going to be privacy, security concerns, but each of them are two different styles, and there are other products out there. I'm just presenting to you the concept. Dropbox is going to be a place to store documents. So Word documents, PDFs, pictures, you name it, any file type. And the great thing about Dropbox is if you are on different devices in different places, as I am, I've got a laptop in my office, I work at the reference desk on a different PC, obviously I'm at home, like you all, I have my phone and my iPad, and sometimes I find myself at my mother's house trying to do something on her computer. I can get to my documents anywhere if they are saved in Dropbox. Again, I think fairly easy to use. The basic version of Dropbox is free. And also the great advantage of Dropbox is because it stores in the cloud, it's a backup. Now, personally, my thing is I won't store my tax returns there because I'm a little concerned about privacy. You make your own choices as long as you're aware. But it's great for backing up your documents, which brings me a little, getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I want to make sure not to forget this, is that when you are doing your exam for this class or any take-home exam, and I hope you've done this for papers, back it up somewhere. 2 years ago, I had a student taking his exam. It was 4:30. He was ready to send it to me. Everything was going great. I don't know what happened. Lost it. Went to IT, went to law school IT, went to university IT. They could not retrieve it because it was stored on his laptop. I don't know, his laptop crashed. I don't really know what happened. He lost his exam and he had to do it over again. Needless to say, he was not a happy camper. You don't want that to happen to you for any exam or anything that's important to you. So back it up somewhere. I'm not saying you have to do Dropbox. By all means, do whatever works for you. Just make sure it's backed up somewhere other than the device you're working on. And again, that's true for any important document. Okay. The only other thing I'll show you, another place to back up, also free, and a couple of you said you were familiar. And let's see, where we go, Google Drive. I tend to use Google Drive. I mean, you can upload documents, PD, other formats to Google Drive, but Google Drive tends to want to put things in Google format. Just kind of nice to know it exists. So you could use a simplified version of Word, you could use a simplified version of Excel, of PowerPoint. You can make forms. I don't know if any of you remember when I had the makeup class, I sent around a survey and asked you to check off which was your preferred date. That was a Google form. Anybody can do that. That's just on Google Drive for free. Google Drive for documents, you see a whole bunch of documents there. The neat thing about it, and then yes, I can store different file types there, but it also allows for real-time editing. So, as you can see, here's an example of real-time collaborative editing. So those of you who want to give it a try on your laptops, go to this web address, https://tinyurl.com/y8tp T-E-E-S, Dookie, and start typing, and we'll see what happens. So I see people are logging in, and I see that up here. Anonymous is fine. So type in the document. Someone put your cursor. There we go. Look, I can do it. Yay! And you'll see popping up the different names. Now you're all logging in as anonymous, which is totally fine, but if you were logged in as yourself in Google, it would pop up as your name, and you can do real-time document editing, or real-time silly communicating if you prefer. The other thing, so that's one thing I like about Google Docs. The other thing is, you may notice I'm going to scroll down a little. Good way to do, again, collaborative editing, because you can also insert comments. I don't know if you've used the comment feature in Word, but Google Drive, or Google Docs and Drive also has the ability to comment. I have done this with colleagues professionally, where we have a document, we need to edit it, and as we go through, it puts in our different comments about things we want to remember. Do we want to do this? Do we want to do that? Maybe we should forget this. You can highlight and add comments. So Google Drive, and again, all you need is a web connection. Questions? Am I convinced you stand on LastPass?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I've achieved my goal then. All right, let's take a break and come back at 5:40, and we will get down to business and talk about the exam. You will find this template here in the final exam link on the course website, and you will want to download this template because that's where you will enter your answers. I have also created on the course homepage this section for questions. At the top you'll see, and I'll talk about the directions. I've highlighted the most important directions, and we'll go through all of them in just a moment. But as you have questions, starting pretty much from the end of class until the day before the exam, if they apply to everyone, in other words, if they're not personal, and you email me a question, I will email everybody the answer and also post them here so you will have a place to check and see what I've told other people so we all can be on the same page. Okay, so you already know from the course documents from the beginning of the semester, exams worth 400 points. To earn them, you must answer all parts of all questions. Again, please try to be as disciplined as you can and go through and answer the different parts. I can't give you credit if you don't give me something. And usually if you do give me something, I can give you some of the credit. One way to be methodical, just a suggestion, is after each part. There are 3 parts to this exam, so after each part, before you get to the next one, go through and make sure you've answered all parts of all of the questions. It's just a suggestion. And then do it again at the end of the exam. Okay, for the logistical aspect. At 9 a.m. on either May 7th or May 8th, so May 7th is Monday, May 8th is Tuesday, you choose one of them. Not both, one is plenty. So on 9 a.m. at May 7th or May 8th, go to room 102B, that's the library administrative office. After class today, we'll take a field trip down and I'll show you where that is, if you'd like. You will pick up the exam sheet, which will look just like this, with one exception, or 2 exceptions, which I will tell you about in a moment. You will pick up the exam sheet. On the first page of your email answers, so again, you'll download this template. Make sure to put your exam numbers. You all, I'm guessing, have that already. Don't tell me this is an anonymous exam. That's why we're going with exam numbers and why this procedure exists as it does. You're going to put on your email answer the question number. So notice right now at the top right-hand corner, you see question number X. That will actually be a number between 1 and 17. The reason for that is that there are 17 of you. So that's one difference from what you're looking at right now. So you will put your exam number on the first page of your answer. You'll put your question number, something between 1 and 17, and advanced legal research. And the reason you're putting all of that is that at 5 p.m. you must email your completed answers to law exams. So if you have all the information up top, they know what the email is for. So lawexams@hofstra.edu. In the subject, make sure you include course name, advanced legal research, my name, SPAR, and your exam number in the subject line. Again, bit of belt and suspenders to make sure your exam gets where it's supposed to go, which is to me. And the reason we go to law exams is, again, so that it remains anonymous. You must also return the question sheets. So this is why you need to be on campus at 9 a.m. and again at 5 p.m. to return the question sheets. And at 5 p.m. you will return the question sheets to the book return slot. And again, we'll take a field trip down to the library after we're done here, and I'll show you where that is. Stop by, and I'll give you your own personalized tour. Okay, so at 5 p.m. you must return your exam sheet to the book return slot. Or by 5:15, but you need to email by 5, return sheet by 5:15. Really, it shouldn't take you that much time to do both. After you email to law exams, you should receive an automatic reply confirming receipt. Make sure you receive that, and then hold on to it. I've never encountered a problem of someone emailing to law exams and they're not getting it, but I don't want to have one. So just make sure you keep that confirmation email. And again, make sure you back up your document to whatever service you like. Dropbox, Google Doc, a thumb drive, whatever it is. Okay, I'm very serious about these instructions, so part 3 and 4 are worth 5 points each, so you get an easy 10 points for just following very simple instructions. Okay, what this exam is in substance is a guided research journal. So your goal is, as it says here, to coherently explain your research strategy for the issue below. So again, the second difference from what you're looking at now is when you pick up the sheet on Monday or Tuesday morning in May, you will see a hypothetical instead of a blank space below your issue. So your goal is to coherently explain your research strategy for that issue. The more detail you provide for how to search, and by how I mean good searches, using a table of contents, all of the strategies that we've talked about across the semester. So the more detail you provide how to search, the better, and also you want to let me know what resource you're searching. So we'll talk about this in more depth. Encyclopedia, how you'll do this, encyclopedia sections, ALR titles, so again, detail about what you are finding. You can use Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg. You can use the books if that's what you want to use. It's entirely up to you. You can switch back and forth. The only thing you may not use are other humans. So unlike your assignments, and please take this very seriously, unlike your assignments, you may not work together. You may not use any form of communication, telephone, email, text, Instagram, Facebook, smoke signals, whatever it is, no humans. But you may use anything else. So all of the notes, the handout I just gave you on research strategy, if you want to take the time to view the course videos, any of that is fine, just not other live human beings. Live human beings also mean not calling Lexis or Westlaw. You need to do the research yourself. So, and that is considered an honor code violation. So you are on your honor to avoid human beings that day. So as with all strict rules, there are a couple of very small exceptions. One will be when you pick up the exam in room 102B, you will pick it up from Jackie, our library administrative assistant. Jackie has never been to law school, so she's not really going to help you with the exam at all. If you do run into a computer problem, of course, talk to IT. If you run into a personal problem, you're taking the exam on Tuesday and you have a flat tire and you can't get here at 9 o'clock, call the registrar's office. That will get their way to me and we will figure out what to do about it. I haven't encountered that, but try to cover all my bases here. So Jackie, IT, registrar are the 3 exceptions to no humans. Do not talk to me that day. You may see me because I work in the library and I can't hide in my office all day. Do not talk to me. I will take off if you ask me a question directly. If you run into a problem, IT, Jackie, registrar.
You can say like good morning though, right?
Best not. I mean, as silly as it sounds, I don't want anybody thinking I'm saying anything more to you than I am to everybody else. And if it's good morning, I know it's a very silly kind of line to draw, but I'd rather draw it that way.
You guys won't be rude if you're like.
You won't be rude. I'll be the one. I'm going to be the rude one. How about that? Okay, but I will be rude only starting as of Monday morning. Since the exam for many of you will start on Monday morning, if you have questions, I will be available. I will check my email on the weekend, which I don't usually do for work, but I will check my email through, the last time I'll check it is 5 o'clock on Sunday. So if you have questions, and I will be looking throughout the weekend. So get your questions to me by 5 o'clock on Sunday. I will answer your questions, and as I already said, if they are generally applicable, I'll email them through Twen and then post them on the website. Questions about exam instructions? Again, make sure to include the information as listed in points 3 and 4 with 10 points. Okay, let's dive into the substance. So as I mentioned, there are 3 parts to the exam. You see on the second page parts 1 and 2. Not surprisingly, the types of resources we've been talking about all semester. So for part 1, you will look at secondary sources. And for question 1, or for part 1, you will look at all 3 types of secondary sources listed in those bullet points. So for encyclopedias, you get to make a choice. You can look at AmJur, you can look at CJS, or you can look at ALR. But you also, in addition to one of those 3, don't do all 3 because you don't want to waste your time. In addition to all 3, you also want to look at law review, or all 3. I didn't just say that. In addition to one of those 3, encyclopedias, AmJur, CJS, ALR, you want to look at law reviews, and you want to look at some form of treatise or practice materials. So proof of facts is fine, causes of action are fine, other types of practice materials we've looked at are fine for that as well. So I am asking you for part 1 to organize your answer by source type. So you'd answer each of those 3 questions listed, and I'm going to go over those in detail in a moment. So you'd first answer all 3 for encyclopedias, then answer all 3 for law reviews, and then finally answer all 3 for treatises. Now I'm asking you to do that if for whatever reason you wind up doing, you answer question 1, Encyclopedia Law Review Treatise, question 2, Encyclopedia Law Review Treatise, question 3, Encyclopedia Law Review Treatise. If you wind up doing it the other way, that's okay too. It's easier for me to grade the first way, which is why I ask it there, but I'm not going to penalize you if you don't.
So is the first question asking like what section or whatever we find, or what material we find, or is it just asking what we use?
Good question, getting there. So again, you're going to look at all 3 topics. So for the first question, what format did you choose? Did you go to Lexis, Westlaw? Did you choose print? Go to Bloomberg for some reason? I don't know if anybody will do that, but that's fine. Did you go on the web? What I want you to do is include the publication that you found. So did you choose, in addition to telling me Lexis or Westlaw, did you find AmJur? Or are you looking for CJS? Or you're looking for ALR? I need to know which of the 3 you chose. For law reviews, did you find a law review from Hofstra Law Review, from the Hofstra Labor Employment Law Journal, from Princeton Law Review? Not Princeton doesn't have a law review. From the California Law Review, whatever. I'm asking you the date of the publication, or the website with the date last updated and the filters used. So dates of publication aren't going to be as clear-cut for encyclopedias, but they will be pretty clear-cut for law reviews. Obviously, law reviews have a year. Question 2. State in detail all of the steps you took to get to your results. Make sure you include the most effective search terms or technique. Now, these questions are duplicative. They appear duplicative, and they most absolutely are duplicative. There is a reason for that. I want to make sure you give me the necessary information, and if I have to ask for it 2 or 3 times, that's okay by me. If you feel like you've answered it in question 1, so you might have given me your search and your filters, and I'm asking for all the steps you took in 2, which is your search and filters in part. Just say, refer my search, see question 1. That's totally fine. As long as you answer it in one of them, and helps if you refer me back. If you don't, I'll see your search in question 1, but that is fine. So don't get worried that, oh my God, is she asking the same thing? If she isn't asking the same thing, I am intentionally. Answer one place and you're good. While we're on sort of overall tips, when in doubt, include it. There are no word limits at any point of this. For your assignments, I gave you word limit because I wanted you to think about what you were saying when time wasn't such an issue. Since you do have somewhat of a time issue here, no word limit. So if you're wondering, should I include it, shouldn't I include it? The answer is, when in doubt, include it. And that's true for the entire exam. The only thing I will say is don't just copy and do search results and you find get a page on Westlaw with 30 results. Don't copy and paste all 30 results and expect me to find the answer. That's your job. So while there are no word limits, I am expecting you to identify the relevant information. Okay, so 1 is the overall resource, Lexis Westlaw, Encyclopedia Law Review Treatise. Number 2 is the steps. Again, in your assignments, throughout all 5 assignments, I've asked you, please tell me the steps you took to find whatever you found, so that's what you're doing in number 2. Make sure you include the most effective search terms or technique. So, if your search was liability HMO, you're going to tell me, I searched secondary sources for liability HMO, and I found ALR, let's see if I remember this, 56 ALR 5th, 7th, page 737, liability of third-party payor. So I've given me the site, given me ALR, and if there's a year, put the year in. I don't remember the year for that. As well as the title. So not only do I have the numbers, but I have the title. Don't give me just the numeric citation, and the reason for that is if you make a typo, and I can't find it with that typo, I won't be able to find it at all. If you give me the title with a new typo in the number, I'm probably going to be able to find it. So question 1, the sources you've searched. Question 2, the steps you took. Again, you can refer back if you've already said that. Question 3, give the full citation information for the best titles. Again, my example of the ALR would be if I look secondary sources and I said, all right, ALR meets my encyclopedia requirement, I'm going to give that ALR citation. Tell me which resources or services you use. So you may have tried different searches. Tell me which one. Maybe you tried secondary sources. Maybe you just tried searching AmJur. Tell me what sources you used to find that best answer. And the search terms used. Maybe you tried different searches before you found a good result. Tell me which search found the best result. And again, if you've already mentioned that in question 2 or 1, tell me that. Also state the names and numbers of the sections and paragraphs and the titles of the articles or treatises. So again, the title of the ALR article. If you're looking at an encyclopedia, remember we were looking at the malpractice section 115 of New York jurisprudence. And I think the section name of 115 was, I think, HMOs. So you tell me New York jurisprudence, malpractice title, section 115, HMOs. And a year if you have it. For treatises, the name of the treatise. Remember, we were looking at that litigating tort claims treatise, section, I think it was like something like 9.63. And 9.63 was managed care.
So contrary to some of the assignments, relevancy is very relevant.
Relevancy is, especially for secondary sources, relevancy is very relevant. You should not have a hard time. So one thing I neglected to mention, so thank you for asking that. I am not testing issue spotting. We spent some time on it because obviously it's incredibly important, but that's not the focus of this course, so I am not testing it. So the fact pattern you will read will have the necessary terminology.
About how long do you think this test will take us on average?
So first year I gave this format, I gave everybody 4 hours. Some people did okay with 4 hours. Some people were a little rushed, and so I decided this isn't a speed legal research course, it's an advanced legal research course, so I decided to give the full 8 hours. I think on average people tend to start finishing it around 2:33. But there are always folks who do things fast, and there are always folks who do things a little bit slower. You want to budget your time. The tendency I've noticed, and the folks who are the most rushed are the folks who I could tell dotted every I and crossed every T with secondary sources, but by the time they got to part 3, which we'll talk about in just a moment, they were rushing through. So set yourself a timer on your phone, or however you like to set timers, and budget your time. Recommended, and obviously everybody's different, but I would say 2 hours for part 1, 3.5 hours for part 2, and 1 hour for part 3. And that still leaves you time for lunch and an extra hour just to make sure you got everything right. And obviously, if not done with secondary sources after 2 hours, you'll take more time, but you'll understand then you have to stay disciplined for the subsequent parts. And yes, relevance will be important. I don't think it should not be too difficult. I will look at your quality of searches, and by quality of searches, you're understanding that if you're searching for cases, if you were doing our hypothetical in class, a search for healthcare law in case databases is not a good search, but a search for healthcare law in treatises is a good search, because they're different types of resources, right? Make sense to everybody, I hope? Okay. And I'm very flexible with that, so I'm not expecting one exact search by any means. But again, I will look at something as generic as healthcare law in cases as not a good search. And we've talked about that. Okay, so we are looking at part 1. And I should also say for part 1, the steps you took, also make sure to mention not only your search, but secondary sources, especially ones like treatises. Looking in the table of contents is a good strategy we just talked about, so mention that. If you get a reference from one secondary source to another, mention that. And then again in part 3, give the full citation information, the names of the section, the paragraph numbers, and the titles of the articles and treatises. And I skimmed over, and I shouldn't have under question 1. So I'm asking you what you searched, include if you searched a particular title, author, the date of publication or website with the date last updated, and filters used. So you want to look at the date last updated for treatises, and if you can find it for encyclopedias, and you may or may not, so that's okay. Obviously, you're not going to find date last updated for law reviews. Law reviews just going to have a date. And it may be that you don't search in question one a particular title. In fact, the better search would be just searching for secondary sources and then finding in the choice of encyclopedias the best one, and then looking at law reviews and then looking at treatises. Just tell me that's what you did. I'm giving you the answers already. Question. Part 2. Part 2 is primary sources. You see the list? Under primary sources, there is no choice. You need to do all of them. So that means you need to answer for statutory codes, both federal and state. At the moment you see question marks in front of the word state, when you pick up the exam, you will see the name of a state. The only name of state you will not see is New York, because I don't want to unfairly advantage one person since we've talked a lot about New York. And you won't see Louisiana either.
Please don't ask it.
So again, I give you a suggestion on how to organize your answers. Same suggestion, actually. So again, you're going to look for all. Emphasis, all. And I'm going to say this hopefully a whole bunch of more times. So codes, state and federal. Judicial decisions, state and federal. Regulations, state and federal. Administrative decisions, guidance, state and federal. Don't forget the regulations and administrative decisions. I said this before, I don't know why, but every year a few people just leave that out. I know we did it last in the course, but it doesn't mean it's not important. Sometimes, as I just said, it's the most important. Not always.
It may be the way that is worded.
Okay, you got to
Judicial decisions and finally regulations and administrative decisions. It sounds like they're one thing.
Well, they're two different bullet points.
I know that, but like in the instructions here, then and finally, so that makes it sound like finally, like those two things are one thing. Like it should be like then judicial decisions, regulations, and finally administrative decisions.
So you want me to take out the word finally?
Yeah, I think it just might be. I am saying I got confused when I was reading through it.
Okay.
That's why I was happy you went over it here, because I was going to ask that question because of where you had finally put it.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
I know.
I can't know how you all interpret, so that's great. So it will read then judicial. Okay, answer all the questions for code. I'm just going to say judicial decisions and regulations and administrative decisions / guidance. Does that make sense to everybody?
I think it was well written.
Does it make sense to you, Shane?
Yes.
Matt.
It makes sense to me.
Everybody, does it make sense to you?
So there's 4 things.
Well, there are
Technically, but
4 types of primary sources, but federal, state, statutory codes, so if you're counting them as 2, federal, state judicial decisions, federal, state regulations, federal, state administrative decisions, guidance. Okay, so if I'm going to have, after class, I will change and upload the corrected form. Okay, so you're looking for your issue in all of the sources. And then you do the following answer the following for each. So it pretty much follows the same format as part 1, the resources used and format you chose. So I went on Westlaw and I searched the USCA, would be an example. And the filters used. And I did a keyword search liability HMO. And what I found was 29 USCA 1144, last updated April 30th, 2018. Make sure you understand for both statutory codes and for regulatory codes, so CFR, USCA on the federal end, whatever state you have, the difference between last amended and last updated. Last updated is when your resource, Lexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg, was last updated. So hint, another answer here, it's probably going to be a very recent date. Whereas last amended could be 2000. Or it could be recent, but it could be anything. Again, I want you to see when code was last updated, bibliographic awareness. State in detail all of the steps you took to get your results. So, it may be as described in question 1, if you just stated your steps. Make sure you include the most effective search terms or technique used for a primary source. You may say, I found in a reference in the secondary source. Then I did a separate keyword search, and again, remember, you want to do separate keyword searches in addition to looking at whatever references you get for all of the types, so for statutes, cases, and regulations. So let me know what the most effective search terms are for each type of primary source. It may be that you look at key numbers. You don't necessarily have to. In this part, tell me what you did. Tell me what filters you used. Did you use a key number filter? Pretty sophisticated. That's great if you do, but you don't have to. Okay, and then finally, the full citation information for the best statute sections. So again, what I just said, and again, if you've already given me that information, say statute section, either just repeat it, because that might be easier, or say statute section as mentioned in question 1. Judicial decisions, again, please give me the name of the case and the citation. You don't need to spend time reading the case. So this is where just take a quick look at the summary of the case. You can look at the head notes, but of course if the head notes go on and on, just look at the summary of the case. If it sounds close, go for it. So again, give the full citation, statutes, judicial decisions, regulations, and administrative decisions guidance you found. Include the date the resources containing your sections were last updated. Okay, that's not going to apply to cases, obviously, but it does apply to statutory codes and regulations. And any updating information for your cases. Don't forget this. You need to shepherdize key site or B site. And I'm giving you the answers. Where applicable, state the name of the section. Again, the name of the section, like section 1144, was other laws. Not very informative, but that's the name of the section. Sometimes it is very informative and useful, especially in state codes. So I'll make it easy for me to see that you found a relevant state or federal code section. Okay, again, getting boring, I hope. Make sure you remember everything. Make yourself a checklist. Maybe go through the research strategy and just write yourself, remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and list. Make sure you list everything. Okay, also important, also giving you some answers here. All of the issues have secondary sources that should not be very difficult to find. Again, the issues have the terminology in them. All of the issues have secondary sources for all of those categories. All of the issue you should find pretty relevant federal and state code, statutory code sections. And for all of the issues, you should find pretty relevant federal regulations. You may or may not find relevant state regulations. So for state regulations, you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to find one or not. Let me know what you did. Tell me I didn't find anything. And even if there was one relevant, I can give you most of the credit. Be very clear if you don't find anything. And say, here's what I did, didn't find anything. For administrative decisions and guidance, you may or may not find for federal or state. Again, just tell me what you did. Tell me what you search, what resources you search, Alexis Westlaw, you went to the administrative decisions, or I went to the Department of Labor website if it's our HMO liability question. I searched for decisions, or I Googled Department of Labor guidance. Tell me what you did. Tell me I didn't find anything. If you don't find anything, maybe if you can, try a couple of different ways, and after a couple of you don't find anything, don't spend more time. So questions on that is going to make your life a whole lot stressful if you understand what you really should find versus what you may or may not find. Okay. There is a legislative history component. You've already done this twice. I am asking you for the legislative history component to fill out the chart on page 4. This chart should look very familiar. So I put up top, I'm asking you to find your state session law citation and include the year. So for whatever state code, statutory code section you find the session law. Make sure you know how to do that. I put that up top because people tend to forget it. So I'm hoping by putting it up top, you will be less likely to forget it. Then the table is the standard federal legislative history table that we have worked with. Then just fill it in. As happened when we did both the workshop and you did the assignment, you will not find a document for every single of these 6 categories. If you don't find a document, say none. That way I know you looked. You obviously go ahead and copy and paste, but don't copy and paste the entire ProQuest screen and just plug it into one box and expect me to identify the different documents. Again, that's your job. Make sure you understand what these documents are and how they are abbreviated. If you understand what they are and how they are abbreviated, this will not be difficult. So quickly, I'm giving you the answers here. On Westlaw, what does Westlaw call hearings? Anybody remember? Ooh. See, make sure you understand the document. Westlaw calls hearings testimony. Okay, and what do debates equal? So we've got congressional record here. Make sure you remember congressional record equals debates. ProQuest calls them debates. Question?
Yeah, so I think I'm still confused where it says state session law citation, but then the chart says federal public law and USCA section number. Is it just for the federal law?
Okay, so let's go back to answer your questions. Go back to page 3 for part B, the legislative history part. Fill in the chart on page 4. Oh, I actually have to go over this too, so I will get to your question. So right now you see 4 question marks on page 3. So fill in the chart for page 4. That will be a year. You will see a year there. That's exactly what you did for assignment 3, legislative history. I gave you a year, and I gave you a statutory code section. So you need to know how to take that year from the statutory code section and come up with a public law number. And again, if you don't remember, come ask me between now and May. Well, I will be here. You can email me. So between now and May 6th at 5 p.m.
So you're giving us a statutory code number, or are you just assuming that?
Well, you will have found the statutory code number in Part A.
Right. No, I'm
So you're going to
It
take...
is based on finding.
Yes. So you're going to take that statutory code number from Part A. You're going to take the year listed in Part B, and basically you're going to look in the credits or history and find the public law number. And that public law number is what you are going to put in the chart federal PL number. Okay, for the state code section, I'm continuing now on Part B, page 3. For the state code section, indicate the session law citation number and year. And that you will put in that top. So the state code section you found, you're going to find the session law number and the year.
That's the only question for the state.
That's the only question for the state law. And again, the only reason I put that on top is because if I put it on the bottom, people seem to forget it. So I'm hoping you won't forget it by putting it on top. All good questions? Any more?
Session law that enacted it, amended it, or it'll be clear?
It'll be clear. And when in doubt, include it. If you see two, just put them both. Okay. Part B obviously is a lot less extensive than Part A, which means it's worth less. If for whatever reason you just weren't able to get all of this straight in your head, don't spend all your time struggling with Part B. Obviously, do it, but again, from an exam strategy standpoint, if you're having trouble, then you expend your efforts in the area that's most important. And I'll talk about exam strategy after we go over Part 3. Other questions? All good ones? Okay, so Part 3 is pulling it all together. Part 3 is essentially the same question you are answering in Assignment 5, the last question. Except you're doing it for the research you've just done for this hypothetical. So I'm asking you to make recommendations for a research methodology you would recommend to your managing partner use for your issue. You must justify your recommendations by explaining why you are directing the managing partner to a particular resource, title, or search strategy. Make sure to give specific recommendations for your issue. Do not just describe generic research techniques. Your partner received an A+ in advanced legal research, so do not insult her intelligence. By that I mean, don't tell your partner what key numbers are. Your partner went through class and understands what key numbers are. Don't tell your partner, secondary resources are great for finding terminology. Your partner went through advanced legal research. What you should tell your partner is, I started in secondary sources and I searched liability HMO. There I found a couple of great secondary sources, 56 ALR 737, liability, blah, blah, blah. I found litigating tort cases, section 963, HMO liability, whatever the name of it is. From there, that gave me reference to 29 USCA 1144. In 29 USCA 1144, I looked at the table of contents and discovered section 1132 civil enforcement might be relevant. And if you don't discover new sections, that's fine. Tell me what you did. Okay. In addition to taking references from secondary sources, I also did a keyword search, or used my keyword search HMO liability, and looked at statutes. That also gave me the same statutory section result, or from that I found additional sections. Make sure, so back here, be specific as possible. Again, when in doubt, include it. No word limit. Be specific as possible. Make sure to specify any useful secondary sources identified and critical primary sources. So the example I just gave you, again, and then I would continue with CFR references and your state regulation, if any, reference, or say no state regulations. I was unable to find state regulations, if that's the case. You must do more than list citations. So the opposite of just giving generic advanced legal research tips, which you shouldn't do, is just giving citations without strategy. So give the searches. Give the techniques, keyword searches, table of contents. You want to say we're a good place to start. And as we talked about when we looked at the research strategy, for issues that you're unfamiliar with, and that's what I'm assuming this issue will be, because I have no way of knowing what classes you all took, you want to start in secondary sources. So again, I'm giving you the answers again. If it helps you, a step-by-step description is recommended. If that makes sense to you. Sometimes all of this is amorphous and I'm going all over the place. If it helps you, 1, secondary sources, here's what I found. 2, follow-up statutory. 3, follow-up. 3, keyword statutory. 4, follow-up cases. 5, keyword cases. 6, follow-up any CFR state regs. 7, keyword CFR state regs. Fit in table of contents in there. Another answer there. Statutory codes, regulations, look at the table of contents. Statutory codes, look at the notes of decisions. I'm just scanning my notes here. Any questions as I do that? No need in this part to tell the partner what didn't work. Just give useful, successful strategies. If you see topic headings in the notes of decisions, although I kind of contradicted myself, so let me clarify. No need to give searches that didn't work, sources that weren't good, but you do want to say you looked at the table of contents, you do want to say you looked at notes of decisions, because those are important sources to check, or tools to check. Again, for statutory codes, for regulatory codes. So when I get you back your assignment 5, I am going to try to give you useful tips for part 3 of the exam. Your partner is not going to be interested in part 3 in what you'd like. I certainly appreciate. Everybody has their preferences. I do too. But your partner, like all human beings, is interested in what's useful to her. So say what is useful. I found the table of contents and that really helped. One way to look at this question, or a different way to look at this question, which might help you, is imagine you have to research this issue again 5 years from now. What would your future self like to know? So just an alternate perspective if that helps. Okay, don't give a citation without explanation. Another tip. Okay, I'm just going to check one other set of overall hints. Again, if you've got questions, chime in. Again, no word limits. And again, when in doubt, include it. Overall hint. I will do what I can to figure out what you mean, but obviously the clearer you are, the better. And by that, spell check. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward and I can figure it out, but not always. If you have time, proofread, that would be good too, especially part 3. Again, you can use Lexis, Westlaw, print. One is not better than the other. It's totally okay to use the one you're more comfortable with for this. You can mix and match if you like. If you do decide to use print, and I don't know that anybody does anymore, and you can't find the volume, then you may need to resort to going online. Again, I don't know that anyone's going to be using print, but just keep that in mind if for whatever reason you do, so you don't get upset. Again, used to be 4-hour exams, now an 8-hour exam, but budget your time. Some folks just need to go a little bit slower than others. That's fine. 8 hours is plenty. But if you're one of the people that stuff takes you a little longer, be more mindful of your time budget and think about that ahead of time. Again, I will respond to all of your questions through 5 p.m. that Sunday before. I will put a corrected exam template for you to download before I leave this evening. Okay, remember TOC, table of contents, notes of decisions. Mention if you get references from other sources. Remember to do separate keyword searches for the primary sources. Make sure you know, and we'll go down when we're done here, where 102B is. The last thing you want to do on whatever morning it is not to know where to go, as well as the book return slot. Make sure you leave time for that last question. Again, I talked about a checklist. Ideas for studying, in addition to going through the research strategy handout, is do the actual exam for either the assignment hypothetical or for our HMO liability hypothetical. Review your assignments. I put comments in there to try to help you correct what you seem not to get as well. Ask. Your assignment bunch? That's okay. Don't hesitate to ask. And last but not least, I'll stay for questions too. Next week, we do have class. Our review will be of the substance, and it will be a Jeopardy-style game. You will divide up into teams. There will be prizes. Your assignment for, well, you have to finish assignment 5 if you haven't already, but your assignment for next week is to bring your own beverage. I'll bring munchies.
Yeah.
Whatever you like to drink.
What is the stipulation on the beverage?
Yeah, don't tell me if it's not allowed.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm just stepping.
Okay. Let me stop this.
She's here.